Welcome to our share on Rambam's Hilchot Talmud Torah. We are going to do episode 4, and we dedicate this in memory of Levi ben Moshe Esther and Elisheva bat Lev Levi, and also in memory of Rabbi Mori, Rabbi Roni Salach ben Avram Ezra. And I'm going to hand you over to my cousin Michael.
Thank you, Rabbi Moshe. So we're about to start chapter 4, Hilchot Talmud Torah, and let's begin. Halacha 1. En melamdim Torah ela letalmid hagun. The Torah should be taught only to a proper student. Na'er b'ma'asav, someone whose conduct is attractive, or latam, or to a person whose behavior is unknown. Aval im haya holech b'derech lo tova machzirin oto lemutav ulehanigim oto b'derech yeshara. However, a potential student who follows bad ways should be influenced to correct his behavior and trained to follow a straight path. Ubodkim oto v'achar kach machnisin oto lebet midrash umelamdim oto. After he repents his deeds, they are examined and he is allowed to enter the house of study to be instructed. So, there is a level of, how a person behaves. You should look at that when you are assessing a potential student, and it's interesting, but. Gemara and Barachot 28a relates a story that Rabbi Gamliel made a restriction upon entry to his house of study to any student who, and I quote, whose inside did not reflect his outside. For example, anyone whose character did not match his external appearance as a Torah scholar. Rabbi Gamliel's colleagues did not agree with this approach, and when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was appointed in his place, all of these restrictions were lifted, and on that very day hundreds of students streamed into the house of study, and even Rabbi Gamliel felt the need to reconsider his approach. This is commented on Lechem Mishnah, and the Chidushei Harim questioned Rabbi Gamliel's change of heart. Did he not know that when the restrictions were lifted, more students would enter the house of study? But Rabbi Gamliel, once he saw that the students entered the house of study, the environment had a positive effect on their characters and prompted self-refinement. Therefore, he reconsidered that it was perhaps the wrong attitude to take, or the wrong philosophy to have, because just being in the house of study would affect you, and you would improve beyond what you thought would be possible. And Rambam continues, Amru Chachamim, Kol Hashona leTalmid she'eino hogun. Our sages said, whoever teaches an improper student, Ke'ilu zarak even lamar kulis. It's as if he throws a stone to Mercury. Now, what is this? He throws a stone to Mercury. When I learned this, it was explained to me that there was a practice. Mercury was the Roman god of wayfarers, and his symbol was 3 stones positioned in the form of a triangle. And to worship this deity was performed by throwing stones at that symbol. And now the explanation I learned for this is that if the student is an improper student, as Rambam says, and you try and teach him, you are perhaps enabling someone who is learning Torah for the wrong reasons. Sometimes people they'll learn something in order to rebut it, or try to rebut it, make a public announcement, say, "Look, I studied with this rabbi, and I don't believe in what he's saying. This is what he's saying, and these are the things that I want to say against it." So, in other words, when you teach a student who has nefarious ultimate aims for for the Torah study that he is being taught, it's as if you are enabling someone who worships idols. I looked at it another way. I looked at it as it's like you are throwing a stone to Mercury. In other words, your aim is to hit Mercury, a planet which is hundreds of thousands of miles away with a stone is waste of effort. It's a waste of effort to teach an improper student. It's like, that's how I kind of interpret it. But this is what it says. And Rambam continues. Shneema, as it is stated, Kitzra even lemargema kol noten lichsel kovod. As one who winds a stone in a sling, so is he who gives honor to a fool. Ein kavod ela Torah. There is no honor other than Torah, as is stated in Proverbs 3:35. Kavod chachamim yincholu. The wise shall inherit honor. Similarly, one should not study from a teacher who does not follow a proper path. Even though he is a very wise man and his instruction is required by the entire nation, you should not learn from him until he returns to a good path. Shneema, as is written, ki siftei kohen yishmuru da'at v'torah yivakshu mipihu ki malach Hashem tzvaot hu. For the priest's lips shall keep knowledge, and they shall seek Torah from his mouth, because he is a messenger from the Lord of hosts. Amru Chachamim, our sages said, Im harav domer lamalach Hashem tzvaot Torah yavakshu mepihu. If a teacher resembles a messenger of the Lord of hosts, seek Torah from his mouth. Im lav, if he does not, Al yavakshu Torah mepihu. Do not seek Torah from his mouth. Halacha 2. Ketzad malmedim. How is Torah taught? Harav yoshev barosh. The teacher sits at the head. Talmidim mukofim lefanav ka'atara. And the students will sit around him. I think this is like a teacher will sits in, let's say, the middle of the room, and the students will perhaps put a semicircle around him. So they're all facing him, and they are all can hear what he's saying. So that the all can see the teacher and hear his words. Lo yeshev harav al hakisei v'al talmidov al hakarka. The teacher should not sit in a chair whilst his student sits on the ground. Ela o hakol ala oret or hakol hakisaot. Either everyone should sit on the ground, or everyone should sit on chairs. V'rishona haya harav yoshev. Originally, the teacher would sit and the students would stand. V'hatalmidim omdim. Umikodem churban bet sheni nahagu hakol lelamed talmidein v'hem yoshvim. Originally, the teachers would sit and the students would stand. However, before the destruction of the second temple, everyone followed the practice of teaching, while both they and the students were seated. Now, what we know this, Megillah 21a notes that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, I think it's in Vayeschanan, and I quote, "Stand together with me, imadi." Since God neither stands nor sits, the verb obviously refers to the proper approach to instruction, where no distinction is made between teachers and students. And Rambam, so Halacha 3, Rambam continues, Im haya melamed mepiv latalmidim melamed. If the teacher desires to instruct the students personally, he is entitled to do so. Im haya melamed al pi mitragem. And if he desires to teach through the medium of a spokesman, or let's say this word means interpreter, mitragem omed beno or ben hatalmidin. The spokesman or interpreter should stand between him and the students. V'harav omer lemetargem. The teacher speaks to the interpreter, or metargem mishmiya l'chol hatalmidim, and the spokesman or interpreter declaims the teaching to all the students. Now, why are we talking about interpreters? Apparently, in those days, the Torah was sometimes learnt in Aramaic, or sometimes learned in Hebrew and was translated into Aramaic. This is perhaps why. But also today, you find some rabbis will come and give shiurim, and they won't have a command, a complete command of the English language, so they'll talk through spokespeople or interpreters. V'lo yagbia. Ukeshehen shoalin lemitragem hu shoel lorav. When they ask the spokesman a question, he asks the teacher. V'harav mashiv lemitragem v'himitragem meshiv leshoel. The teacher in turn replies to the spokesman, and the spokesman replies to the questioner. The teacher should not raise his voice above that of the interpreter. Similarly, when the spokesman asks the questions of the teacher, he should not raise his voice above that of the teacher. אין המתרגם רשאי לא לפחות ולא להוסיף ולא לשנות. The spokesman is not allowed to detract from, add to, or change the teacher's word. אלא אם כן היה המתרגם אביו של חכם או רבו, unless he is the teacher's father or teacher. Obviously, if the interpreter is the teacher's father or teacher, he trumps him in terms of what he can do, obviously. So that's why Rambam mentions this. Omer harav lemitragan. If the teacher tells the spokesman, Kach omar li rabbi, my teacher told me the following, or Kach omar li abai mari, or my father and teacher told me the following, or kushe omer hamiturgaman hadvarim la'am, omer b'shem hachacham. When the spokesman relates the teaching to the people, he should quote the statement in the name of the sage who authored it, mentioning the name of the teacher's father or teacher. Shel avi harav or shel rabo. Saying so-and-so said, so-and-so, the sage, said the following. Ve'omer, kach amar rabna ploni. Mentioning the name of the teacher's father or teacher, saying so-and-so, the sage, said the following. Afal pi shelo hizkir harav shemo shel chacham. This is allowed despite the fact that the teacher did not mention the sage's name. She'asur likwot l'rabo or la'aviv bishmo, because it is forbidden to refer to one's teacher or father by name. Halacha dalet. Arav shelamed lo havinu hatalmidim. If the teacher taught a concept and it was not grasped by the students, lo yikas aleihem b'yugaz, he should not become upset with them and display anger. Ela chose v'shoneh hadavar afilu kama pa'amim. Rather, he should repeat and review the matter, even if he must do it many times. Ad she'avinu omek ha'halacha, until they appreciate the depth of the halacha. V'chein lo yomar hatalmid. And similarly, the students should not say, Hevanti, I understand, v'hu lo hevin, when he does not understand. Ela, chozeh v'shoel afilu kama pa'amim. Rather, he should ask again and again, even if it requires several repetitions. Ve'im ka'as alav rabo v'ragaz. If his teacher becomes angry with him and upset and displays anger, the student should tell him, Rabbi, Torah hi, v'lilmod ani tzarech, v'da'ati katzara. My teacher, this is Torah. It is necessary that I study, and my powers of comprehension are weak. There's nothing to be ashamed of if you don't understand deep concepts the first time. Sometimes it needs to be explained to you. Don't be embarrassed. First of all, the teacher should not get upset with the student. That's a basic premise that all teachers should know anyway, that people are on different levels of understanding, and sometimes you have to repeat, especially deep concepts have to be repeated and repeated until the person understands. But so too, conversely, the student, if he doesn't understand, don't say, oh yeah, I understand now, when he doesn't really understand it. He'll just sit baffled for the rest of the lesson, and it'll be a waste of time, and the teacher will think he's done his job, and he hasn't done his job. He should say to the students, should say to the teacher, look, this is complex Torah, I need to understand it, please teach it to me again. Should have the confidence to say that to his teacher and not feel embarrassed in any way. It's not embarrassing, it's not, it shouldn't be a source of embarrassment. So halacha 5, lo yihya hatalmid bosh mechaverov. A student should also not be embarrassed Shalamdu mipam rishona ad shniya, because his colleagues grasped the subject matter at the first or second time. V'hu lo lomad ela acha kama pa'amim, whilst he did not understand it until it was repeated a number of times. She'im nitbayosh midvar zeh. If he becomes embarrassed because of such matters, nimtza nichnas v'yotze levesa midrash v'hu eino lelamed klum. He will find himself going in and out of the house of study without learning anything. Lefichach amu chachamim harishonim. Therefore, the sages of the previous generation stated, Eina miyashan lomed. The bashful student will not learn. V'lo hakpadan milamed. And nor should the short-tempered teach. Very wise words. Rambam continues, Bameh dvarim amurim. When does the previous apply? Bizman shelo havinu hatalmidim hadavar mipnei amko, or mipnei da'atan shehi katzra. When the students did not understand the subject matter because of its depth or because of their limited power of comprehension. Aval im nikar l'rav. However, if it appears to the teacher, shehem mitrashlin b'divrei Torah misrapin aleihem, that they are not applying themselves to the words of the Torah and are lax about them, ulefichach lo hevinu, and therefore do not understand, chayov lugos aleihem ulahachliman b'dvarim kedei lach dadam. He is obligated to display anger towards them and shame them with his words, to sharpen their powers of concentration. In this context, our sages said, cast fear into the students. So if you notice, as a teacher, if you notice your students are not paying attention, collectively they've lost they've kind of doing their own thing, and you're trying to teach, you should have a display of anger. A display of anger is enough to bring them back to concentration. As it says, cast fear into the students. And Maimon continues, Lefichach ein ra'u l'rav linhog klvotz rosh lifnei hatalmidim. Therefore, it is not fitting for a teacher to act frivolously in the presence of his students. Lo lischok mipneihem. He should not amuse himself in their presence. V'lo le'achol olishtot imahem. Nor should he eat and drink with them. Kedei shetieh emoto aleihem v'yilemdu mimenu bimheirah. These restrictions are intended so that they fear him and study under him at a fast pace. So we know that, you should not be a joker in front of your students. Your students are supposed to respect you and, have a kind of fear of you. You shouldn't become too familiar with them and too much of a buddy, because you lose that teacher-student relationship. But, interestingly enough, this doesn't imply that a teacher should demonstrate a totally stern approach. It is noted in Shabbat that a rabbi would begin his lectures with a witty statement.
Humorous, light-hearted statement.
Yeah. And his students would laugh, and afterwards he would sit in awe and begin the lesson. So that's a very intelligent. If you could come up with something witty before you start the lesson, that always puts everybody at ease and instantly makes a connection.
I remember my son Yoni once actually gave a reason for that, why you would start it, why not give it in the middle or towards the end. The obvious reason is because it brings a light-hearted approach. Also, but the other reason is that it piques your interest from the very beginning. And the other reason that Yoni said is that you don't know if your teacher is going to make another comment, so you're constantly listening and waiting to see there might be something else coming up. I thought that was an interesting idea, because when you pique your interest from the beginning, it will set the tone for the whole shiur. So it helps with the concentration, I think.
And Zechron Levracha, your father, used to also say, you must, when you meet people for the first time or you meet them in a meeting for something, always start with a good-humoured, witty joke, because it puts them at ease and it sets the tone, exactly like you're saying, for a kind of a more connection, which is very, very, very true. Halacha 6. Ve'en sho'alim et harav kashikanes lemidrash. When a teacher enters the house of study, questions should not be posed to him. Ad shetit yashev da'ato alav, until he gathers his powers of concentration. Ve'en hatalmid sho'el kashe yikanes. Also, a student should not ask until until he sits and rests. Two should not ask questions at once. And also, a teacher should not be asked about an extraneous matter. Ela me'oto ha'inyan shehen asukin bo, but rather only regarding the subject which they are involved in, lest he become embarrassed. So this is a very interesting halacha. This is stating that when a teacher prepares himself for a shiur, perhaps when he walks in, for the few minutes before he walks in, he's mentally preparing the body of his shiur, and he's set it up in his mind, so that when he walks in, he's ready to deliver it, and he's placed everything in a certain order. If, as soon as he walks in, he's asked about something completely different, or he's asked a question, it could ruin his kind of flow, that his preparation, his kind of moments he has before he enters the classroom. And so he may be, that's why it says he should not become embarrassed, because his mind may be elsewhere. He's deeply involved in what the lesson he's about to give. He shouldn't be taken to another place. Let him sit down and let him, and then once he's settled, then it's perhaps the right time to ask. And Rambam continues, "V'yesh larav lahatos et hatalmidim b'she'elotav u'ma'asim she'oseh mipneihem." The teacher may deliberately lead the students astray with his questions and the deeds he carries out in their presence, k'dei lachadodon, in order to sharpen their powers of concentration. Uchdei sheyeda im zochrim hem ma shelemadam or enam zochrim. This is to test whether they remember what he taught them or not. Ve'en sarich lomar, and it is needless to say, sheyesh lo reshut lish'ol otam be'inyan acher she'en oskim bo. He may ask them regarding another matter which they are not presently involved with, k'dei lezarzam, in order to spur them on. So this Rambam is saying here, the Rav has complete carte blanche to go off piste. So with his teachings, to see who's listening. This, sometimes when you suddenly go off on a tangent and you ask a question, the students are like, what? And they don't know what you're talking about, and because they're suddenly in a different place. But so the Rav, as opposed to the student can't ask off-piste questions. The Rav can do it in order to test whether they're really paying attention or not. Halacha 7. Ein sho'alim me'umad ve'ein mashivin me'umad. A person should not ask a question while standing, nor should a person respond while standing. Lo bigvoa. One should not ask from a high place, probably an elevated place. V'lo merachok, and not from far away. V'lo me'achorei hazekanim, or from behind the elders. Ve'ein sho'alim harav. And they a question should be asked of the teacher regarding only the subject which they are reading. And a question should be asked only with an attitude of awe. You know, it's important to understand that your teacher is your Rav, and you should have a sense of awe. Don't ask like you're asking a mate a question. You're asking your teacher, your Rav, a question. Do it with a bit of respect and with a bit of awe. Lo yish'al be'inyan yoter b'shlosh halachot. And also, a person should ask concerning only 3 halachot while studying the same subject. So either this means do not hog the questions, don't do a barrage of questions, because everybody wants to ask questions. Don't start asking, I want these 3 questions answered, or only limit them to 3 halachot. And it's also easier for the teacher. He doesn't have to remember 3 questions. Halacha 8. Shnayim shesha'alu. The following applies when 2 people ask a question. Sha'al echad ke'inyan. If one asks a question to the point, to the things they are studying, sha'al echad shelo ke'inyan nizkakin le'inyan. If the other one is not to the point, attention is paid to the question which is to the point. Ma'aseh v'she'eno ma'aseh nizkakin le'ma'aseh. If one question concerns a matter to be applied in practice and the other is an abstract question, halacha the question is the matter is applied in practice and the other is an abstract question, attention is paid to the question which concerns the matter to be applied in practice. Halacha or midrash naskakin halacha. If one question concerns Torah law and the other is the interpretation of the verses of the Torah, like midrash, attention is paid to the question which concerns halacha or Torah law. Midrash ba'agada, if one question concerns the interpretation of the verse of the Torah and the other one is agada, nazkakin la midrash. Attention is paid to the question which concerns the interpretation of the verses of the Torah. That's midrash and agada. So you must answer the question from the midrash. Agada v'kal v'chomer, nazkakin la kal v'chomer. If one question is concerning agada and the other the idea of kal v'chomer, the inference drawn from a minor premise to a major one, attention is paid to the question in which it concerns the kal v'chomer, or the inference drawn from a minor premise to a major premise. Kal v'chomer ugzera shava nizkakin la kal v'chomer. If one question concerns the inference drawn from a minor premise to a major premise, i.e. kal v'chomer, and the other is an analogy, which is the analogy established on the basis of similar words, attention is paid to the question which concerns the analogy established on the basis of similar words. Hayu hasho'alin shnayim. If of the 2 questioners, echad chacham, echad talmid. One was a sage and one was a commoner. And there's kakin la chacham. Attention is paid to the sage. Talmid v'ama aretz. There's kakin la talmid. If one is a student and one is a commoner, attention is paid to the student. Shnehem chachamim, shnehem atalmidim. However, if they are both sages or both students, or shnehem amei haaretz, or both are commoners, sha'alu shnehem b'shtei halachot. Similarly, if 2 people both ask questions concerning Torah law, or shebishtei teshuvot, or both wish to reply what has been previously stated, or b'shtei she'olot shnehem ma'asim, or both questions concern actual deeds. Harishut biyad hamitragem me'ata. From this point on, the spokesman has the option of giving precedence to whichever question he desires. Halacha 9. En yishenim bebet hamidrash. One should not sleep in the house of study. V'chol hamit namnem bebet hamidrash chachmato ne'aset koraim. When a person dozes in the house of study, his Torah will be torn in shreds. This is alluded to in Solomon's words of wisdom in Proverbs 23:21. Drowsiness will clothe a man in rags. And Rambam concludes, Misichin bebet hamidrash, ela b'divrei Torah bilvad. Conversation in the house of study should concern only the words of Torah. Afilu mi shinit atesh. Even if one sneezes, en omrim lo rufuah bebet hamidrash. He should not wish him to your recovery or bless you. Gesundheit in the house of study. Needless to say, the discussion of other matters is prohibited. Ukdushat bebet hamidrash chumura mikdushat betei knesiot. The sanctity of a house of study exceeds that of a synagogue. And I just want to comment that interestingly enough, the greater sanctity of the house of study is expressed by the law in Hilchot Talmud 11:14 that a synagogue may be transformed into a house of study. However, a house of study should not be transformed into a synagogue. This is where we get that inference. The sanctity of a house of study exceeds that of a synagogue. And that concludes Perek 4 of Hilchot Talmud Torah.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. All these things are very, very practical things we might already have known, which we need chizuk for, things which we did not know, which we certainly need to adhere to. So definitely a lesson for anyone and everyone. So thank you very much, Michael. We will see you next time we convene, Bezrat Hashem, when we'll be doing the 5th chapter. Thank you and have a wonderful and blessed week.